He left her after she said she was infertile. 2 years later, he saw her with twins, and his world shattered. Olivia Hart sat quietly in the doctor's office, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, knuckles white, as the fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly in the background. The room smelled like antiseptic and paper, and time seemed to stretch endlessly between the moment the doctor entered and the moment he finally spoke. His voice was calm, clinical, the kind of tone designed to be gentle but impossible to ignore. He explained the results, using words like insufficient function, low probability, and then the word that hit her like a punch to the chest, infertile. She didn't cry. Not right away. She just nodded, mechanically, her face pale as her heartbeat roared in her ears. By the time she stepped outside into the gray afternoon light, everything around her felt unreal. Cars passed. People talked on their phones, children laughed in the distance. The world kept spinning while hers had just stopped. She walked home in a daze, the diagnosis circling her thoughts like a cruel echo. Infertile. The word didn't fit her. It didn't belong in her body. She had always dreamed of being a mother, of holding a child in her arms, of decorating a nursery filled with soft colors and fairy lights. That dream now felt like a cruel joke. When she finally made it to her apartment, she stood in the doorway for a long moment before closing it softly behind her. Her boyfriend, Nicholas Rhodes, was home early for once. Dressed in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, he stood by the kitchen island with a glass of scotch in one hand and his phone in the other. The golden evening light made his blue eyes look even colder than usual. He glanced at her briefly before returning his gaze to the screen. "You're home early," he said without much emotion. Olivia didn't answer right away. She took off her coat slowly, folded it with shaking hands, and set it on the back of the chair. Then she spoke, her voice quiet and steady, but edged with something fragile. "I went to the doctor today." Nicholas looked up, curious now. "And?" She took a breath, steadying herself. "They said I'm infertile. I can't have children." There was a pause. A long one. Nicholas stared at her, his expression unreadable. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't step forward. He simply processed the words like he would bad business news, detached, emotionless, cold. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he placed his glass down with a soft clink, grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair, and walked to the door. "That changes things," he said flatly. "I'm sorry." And with that, he left. Just like that. The door closed behind him with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any argument could have. Olivia stood frozen in the silence he left behind, staring at the door as if it might open again. But it didn't. And when she finally sank to the floor, knees pulled to her chest, the tears came in heavy, uncontrollable waves. Not just for the man who walked away, but for the future she believed had just been stolen from her. That night, the apartment felt like a stranger's. Every object, a photo, a coffee mug, a half-read book, was suddenly a reminder of a life that had unraveled in the span of a single sentence. And as the city moved on outside her window, Olivia lay curled on the couch, her body shaking, her heart hollow, with only one word ringing in her mind. Over and over again. Infertile. The days that followed blurred together in a quiet, aching haze. Olivia stayed inside, barely speaking, barely moving, wrapped in a soft blanket that did nothing to warm her. The apartment, once a space filled with comfort and shared routines, now felt cold and unfamiliar, like the home of someone she didn't recognize. Nicholas hadn't called. He hadn't texted. It was as if she'd been erased from his life as easily as he had stepped out of the door. She didn't tell anyone right away. There was too much shame, too much disbelief wrapped around the diagnosis. Every time she replayed the moment in the doctor's office, it felt more surreal, like it had happened to someone else. The word infertile echoed through her mind relentlessly, louder at night when the world quieted and she was alone with her thoughts. She avoided the mirror. She didn't want to see the woman who had been left behind, who had failed at something so fundamentally human. Her friends texted, some knocked on her door, and her mother left voicemails asking if she was all right, but Olivia ignored them all. What could she say? That her partner had abandoned her the moment he learned she couldn't give him children? That the future she had imagined was gone in the span of a single afternoon? There were no words for the kind of pain she was feeling, no quick answer that would make sense to someone who hadn't felt their entire identity unravel. Food lost its appeal. She would pour a bowl of cereal only to leave it untouched. The thought of coffee made her nauseous. She told herself it was grief. Her body was simply reacting to emotional trauma. She hadn't left the apartment in a week when she finally opened her laptop and began reading about infertility. She fell into late-night forums, medical articles, stories of women who had tried for years, who had received the same diagnosis and somehow continued on. Some of them adopted. Some tried IVF. Some gave up. Olivia didn't know which one she was yet. All she knew was that her sense of womanhood felt shattered, and her heart ached with a grief that didn't have a clear form. At some point, she returned to her sketchbook, not to work, but to survive. The pages were messy at first, angry lines, broken forms, the shape of a body curled in on itself. But slowly, her drawings changed. A childless mother. A blooming flower with no roots. A small figure walking away from a larger shadow. Art had always been the only way she knew how to process her emotions, and though her hand trembled, the pencil gave her a kind of language she didn't have the strength to speak aloud. A week later, she forced herself to go outside. The light stung her eyes at first, and the noise of the street felt almost too much to handle, but she kept walking. She ended up in a small cafe several blocks away, one she and Nicholas used to visit on weekends. The barista recognized her and gave a gentle smile, but didn't ask questions. She sat in the corner by the window with a cup of tea she didn't drink and watched the world move on without her. Parents with strollers, couples laughing, teenagers glued to their phones, life, in all its chaos, continued. That realization both hurt and helped. Maybe the world wouldn't stop for her grief. But maybe, eventually, she wouldn't stop either. That night, something strange happened. She was brushing her teeth when her stomach twisted, and a wave of nausea hit her hard. She dropped the toothbrush into the sink, grabbed the counter, and closed her eyes until it passed. Her first thought wasn't pregnancy. It couldn't be. It had to be stress. Or maybe food poisoning. But a flicker of doubt crept in, uninvited. She dismissed it and went to bed. Over the next few days, the nausea didn't go away. She couldn't stand the smell of eggs. Her breasts felt sore. She was exhausted even after hours of sleep. But she kept telling herself it was depression. Trauma could wreak havoc on the body. She hadn't had a real appetite in weeks, after all. Her cycle had been irregular before. Nothing about her condition was normal anymore. And still, the thought refused to leave. Finally, her best friend, Ava, showed up uninvited. She barged into the apartment, armed with groceries and sheer determination. She hugged Olivia tightly and said, "You don't get to disappear like this. Not on my watch." Olivia cried in her arms, really cried for the first time, until her chest ached and her body sagged from the weight of it all. Ava made her soup, cleaned the kitchen, opened the curtains. She didn't ask too many questions, just stayed, grounding Olivia with her presence. That evening, after another wave of nausea hit, Ava tilted her head and asked gently, "Liv, is there any chance you might be pregnant?" Olivia laughed bitterly. "I'm infertile, remember?" But Ava didn't laugh. "Are you sure?" It was the first time Olivia realized she wasn't. Not really. Not with a second opinion. Not with proof. Just a single diagnosis delivered in a sterile office by a doctor who barely looked at her when he said the words. That night, Olivia barely slept. Her mind turned over the same thoughts again and again. Her body was trying to tell her something. Maybe it wasn't broken after all. Maybe, just maybe, the story she thought had ended was only beginning. The following morning, Olivia stood in the bathroom, barefoot on the cold tile floor, staring at the pregnancy test on the counter. Her fingers trembled as she held the unopened box, heart pounding in her chest with a force she couldn't ignore. The room was quiet, still, but inside her mind it was chaos. She had told herself it was just to rule it out, just to prove to herself that her body was reacting to stress and nothing more. And yet, even as she tried to stay grounded in logic, there was a strange fluttering in her chest, something dangerously close to hope. She opened the box with stiff hands, read the instructions twice though she already knew them, and then finally, with her breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief, she took the test. The minutes that followed were the longest of her life. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, fingers intertwined tightly in her lap, barely daring to breathe. Thoughts rushed through her mind faster than she could catch them. What if it was positive? What would that mean? What would she do? What if it was negative? Would she feel relieved, or crushed, or both? When the timer on her phone buzzed softly, she didn't move. Not at first. She simply stared at the blinking screen, unwilling to face whatever answer waited for her just inches away. Then, slowly, she stood up and approached the sink. Her eyes dropped to the test. 2 lines. Her heart stopped. She blinked, thinking maybe her eyes were playing tricks on her. But the lines remained, bold, clear, impossible to deny. She reached for the test with shaking hands, brought it closer, read the result again and again until her brain caught up with what she was seeing. Pregnant. She sat down on the closed toilet lid, the plastic test still in her hand, and stared at the white wall in front of her. Pregnant. The word rang in her mind like a bell, vibrating through her bones. It didn't make sense. She had been told it wasn't possible. She had mourned the loss of this future, buried it beneath heartbreak and grief. And yet, here it was. She was pregnant. Tears welled in her eyes, not the hot, messy sobs of grief she had grown so used to, but something different. Softer. Disbelieving. She covered her mouth with her hand as the tears fell silently, stunned by the quiet miracle that had taken root inside her. Later that day, she made an appointment at a new clinic. She didn't tell Ava, not yet. She needed certainty before she could speak the words out loud. The receptionist scheduled her for the next morning. Olivia barely slept that night. She lay on her back, hand resting lightly on her stomach, wondering who this tiny life inside her might become. She imagined small hands, soft giggles, baby clothes hanging by the window. Then just as quickly, she pulled herself back, afraid to believe too much too soon. The clinic was brighter than the first, more welcoming. The nurse who took her vitals smiled warmly and asked if this was her first pregnancy. Olivia hesitated before nodding. She didn't know how to explain the weight of her answer. When the doctor came in, she explained her history, how she had been diagnosed as infertile only weeks earlier by a different physician. The doctor raised her eyebrows slightly, reviewing the chart, then said carefully, "Well, diagnoses can vary depending on the tests and timing. Sometimes the body surprises us. Let's take a look and see what's happening." Olivia lay down on the examination table, her hands clenched over her stomach. The ultrasound gel was cold, but she hardly noticed. She watched the doctor's face as she moved the wand across her abdomen, searching the screen for answers. Seconds passed, then the faint, unmistakable sound of a heartbeat filled the room. Then another. Olivia's eyes widened. "There are 2, the doctor said, smiling. You're carrying twins. Olivia covered her mouth again, tears spilling down her cheeks. The doctor continued speaking, but her voice faded into the background. 2 heartbeats. 2 lives. Inside her. It was more than a miracle. It was everything she had believed she'd lost forever. When she finally left the clinic, she clutched the ultrasound image like it was the most precious thing she had ever owned. Her steps were light, almost dreamlike, as she walked home through the busy city streets, past strangers who had no idea her entire world had changed. Once inside her apartment, she placed the image gently on the table, sat in front of it, and simply stared. 2 tiny shapes, barely formed, but undeniably real. All those weeks of nausea, exhaustion, and doubt, this had been the reason. Not depression. Not despair. Life. New life. She picked up her sketchbook and began to draw, not with fury or fear, but with something close to reverence. She sketched 2 small figures inside a heart-shaped cradle, surrounded by stars and soft light. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know how she would do it, or if she'd ever be ready. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel broken. She felt chosen. The months that followed unfolded like a quiet awakening. Olivia's life, once steeped in grief and uncertainty, began to fill with new rhythms, new responsibilities, and a growing sense of wonder. Pregnancy wasn't easy. Her body changed rapidly, and with twins, every symptom seemed doubled: nausea that lingered until the afternoon, fatigue that settled deep in her bones, and sharp waves of emotion that came without warning. But for every wave of discomfort, there was a moment that made it worth it: hearing the heartbeat again during a checkup, seeing the shapes of their tiny bodies develop on the ultrasound screen, feeling the first flutter of movement like a whisper beneath her skin. These were the small, private victories she clung to, even on the hardest days. She went back to her art slowly. Not because someone asked her to, but because she needed it. Drawing became her anchor again, a way to speak the feelings she didn't always know how to say. Her illustrations began shifting from abstract expressions of grief to softer, more hopeful depictions of motherhood and transformation. She drew round bellies, babies held in tired arms, women standing alone beneath stars but still glowing with quiet strength. Her style matured, deepened. She shared some of her work online under a new name, unsure whether she wanted to attach her own identity to it just yet. But the response was overwhelming. Messages began pouring in from women who felt seen, from people who had lived their own forms of loss and now found something healing in her lines and shadows. With each passing week, her confidence grew. She reconnected with her closest friends, including Ava, who cried when she saw the ultrasound photos and brought her a basket full of baby clothes the next day. Ava also insisted on helping set up a nursery in the spare room of Olivia's apartment, which had until then been used for storage and untouched canvases. They painted the walls a soft shade of sage green, hung twinkling lights around the window, and installed 2 cribs side by side, one with a tiny embroidered owl, the other with a fox. As she watched the room take shape, Olivia felt a mixture of surreal joy and cautious disbelief. She still hadn't completely let go of the fear that something might go wrong, but for the first time, her hope was stronger than her doubt. Strangers noticed her growing belly, offered seats on the bus, smiled at her in coffee shops. Some days, she would catch her reflection in a window and barely recognize the woman looking back, a woman who had once curled up on the floor in heartbreak, now standing tall, carrying life within her. There was power in that image. She wasn't the same person Nicholas had walked out on. She wasn't the fragile, grieving woman she had been when the doctor first delivered that diagnosis. She was someone new now, someone fierce and quiet and full of life, not just inside her body, but all around her. In the 7th month, Olivia received an unexpected email from a small gallery downtown. One of their curators had seen her work online and wanted to include a few pieces in a local exhibition focused on motherhood and personal identity. She hesitated at first. She had spent so long hiding, so long questioning whether she had anything left to offer. But Ava encouraged her to do it. "You've lived this. You've earned the right to be seen," she said. So Olivia agreed. She submitted 3 pieces under her full name, for the first time in over a year. The night of the gallery opening was quiet and intimate, with soft music playing and dim lights illuminating each painting. Olivia wore a flowing cream-colored dress that hugged her round belly gently and brought out the depth in her dark eyes. She stood in the corner for most of the evening, quietly observing as people stopped in front of her work, some of them lingering, others wiping away tears. It was the first time she had seen strangers emotionally moved by something she had made. It wasn't fame or money or validation she felt. It was something deeper, connection. A woman approached her near the end of the night, slightly older, with silver in her hair and kindness in her eyes. "Did you paint this one?" she asked, pointing to a piece of a woman holding 2 infants while staring up at a sky full of stars. Olivia nodded. "I did. It feels like it understands something I never knew how to explain," the woman said softly. "Thank you." Olivia didn't know what to say. She just smiled, touched her belly gently, and said, "I think they helped me paint it." As she left the gallery that night, the city streets glowing with warm lights and soft rain misting in the air, Olivia paused on the sidewalk and looked up at the sky. It was a quiet moment, but it wrapped around her like a promise. She was going to be okay. Maybe not in the way she once thought, maybe not on the timeline she'd imagined. But in her own way, on her own terms. And the most beautiful part? She wouldn't be doing it alone anymore. The final weeks of Olivia's pregnancy arrived with a mixture of anticipation, exhaustion, and quiet strength. Her body felt heavier with each passing day, the weight of the twins pressing into her spine and ribs, stretching her skin until it itched and ached. But beneath the discomfort, there was a steady fire of determination. Every small pain, every sleepless night, every breathless climb up the stairs reminded her that she was still living a reality she had once believed was impossible. She took nothing for granted. Every kick was a message. Every roll of movement under her ribs was a reminder of what had grown from grief and uncertainty. She had stopped trying to imagine the girls' faces. Somehow it felt more sacred to let them arrive as they were, without projections or expectations. But sometimes, late at night, when the apartment was quiet and her back was pressed against her favorite pillow, she would wonder. Would they have her eyes? His smile? Would they love the color yellow, or hate carrots? She knew she was about to meet 2 people she would love more than anyone in the world, and yet, they were complete mysteries. The thought made her feel like the edge of something immense and beautiful. She spent more time walking during those final weeks. She had learned to find rhythm in simple things, buying fresh fruit at the market, letting sunlight touch her skin through the window, arranging tiny clothes into drawers and folding soft blankets over crib rails. She began documenting her final trimester through sketches and journaling, combining her drawings with handwritten notes that she addressed to the girls. She wrote about her fears and her hopes, about the day she found out they existed, about the doctor who had been wrong, and the strength she never knew she had until she had no other choice. But amidst the calm, there was still one shadow that lingered. She hadn't heard from Nicholas in almost 8 months. He had disappeared from her life the day she needed him most, and since then, he had remained a silent figure in the back of her memory, unspoken but not forgotten. Part of her still carried the sting of his departure, the way he had chosen to leave rather than stand beside her. There were moments she imagined him seeing the girls, realizing they were his, wondering if he'd feel regret or nothing at all. And yet, she refused to let that fantasy occupy too much of her heart. These children were born from her pain, yes, but also from her will, and she wouldn't allow them to carry the legacy of his absence. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Olivia was walking slowly through the park, one hand under her belly, the other holding a thermos of warm herbal tea. She was due in less than 2 weeks. The trees were starting to turn, their leaves just beginning to blush into autumn, and a soft breeze rustled through the branches overhead. She sat down on a bench near the fountain, taking a deep breath and watching a group of children chase bubbles in the distance. She didn't see him at first. It was only when she turned slightly to stretch her back that her eyes caught on a tall figure across the park. Dressed in a tailored coat, with sandy blonde hair and a distracted expression, Nicholas stood near the edge of the path, speaking into his phone. Her entire body went cold, then hot, then cold again. The world narrowed into a tunnel of sound and memory. For a long moment, she wondered if she was hallucinating, maybe the exhaustion was finally getting to her. But then he looked up. Their eyes met. He froze. He ended the call. Olivia's heart raced as he began walking toward her, slowly at first, then more quickly as he recognized her face. He hadn't changed much, still tall, still sharp around the edges, still carrying the same air of quiet confidence. But there was something else in his face now. A weight. A hint of vulnerability she had never seen before. He stopped a few feet away, unsure how close he was allowed to come. "Olivia," he said, almost in disbelief. "You're pregnant." She didn't answer right away. She looked at him with an expression that held no anger, but also no welcome. Her silence made him flinch. "Is it mine?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. "They are," she replied calmly, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. "Twin girls. Due soon." He sat down beside her slowly, staring ahead at the fountain, trying to breathe. "I didn't know," he said, after a moment. "No one told me." "You didn't ask," she replied, not bitterly, but with truth. "You left. And I didn't chase you. I thought you couldn't." He stopped himself. "I was scared. I handled it wrong." "Yes, you did," she said quietly. "But I'm not here for apologies. I've made peace with your absence. They are my daughters, Nicholas. I've carried them alone, and I will raise them if I have to. But you have a choice now. Not for me, for them." He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw something crack behind his blue eyes. He didn't speak. He just nodded, slow and uncertain, like a man beginning to understand the cost of his silence. She stood carefully, wincing as her back tightened. He instinctively reached out to help, and she allowed it, just for balance. Their hands touched for the first time in almost a year. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "But if you truly want to be a part of this, you need to show up. Not with words. With presence." Then she walked away, leaving him standing beneath the amber light of the trees, alone with the weight of the future he might still have a chance to fight for. The night before her due date, Olivia couldn't sleep. Her body ached with the weight of 2 full-term babies, her back throbbed, and her legs cramped every time she tried to shift positions. But it wasn't just the discomfort that kept her awake, it was everything that had happened in the past few days. Her brief encounter with Nicholas in the park had stirred up more than she expected. She hadn't planned on ever seeing him again, much less having to explain to him that he was about to become a father to 2 little girls. And yet, there had been something in his eyes during their conversation, something that didn't resemble the man who had walked away. There had been no arrogance, no indifference. Just shock. And something like guilt. She didn't know what to make of it. She didn't want to open her heart to false hope. She had learned, painfully, that people can vanish at the moment you need them most. But she also wasn't the same person she had been 2 years ago. She had grown, hardened in some places, softened in others. She had learned how to carry her pain without letting it define her. Now, on the edge of motherhood, she found herself staring into the ceiling, whispering words to her daughters through her belly, promises about love and safety and strength, no matter what happened next. At dawn, her first contraction came. It wasn't dramatic. Just a slow tightening, like a warning. But soon, the waves came faster, deeper, and undeniable. She called Ava first. Then the hospital. She moved carefully around the apartment, double-checking her hospital bag, making sure everything was in place. Ava arrived in a rush, flustered but excited, and helped Olivia into the car. The city was still half asleep as they drove through the early morning light, the sun just beginning to spill gold across the tops of buildings. The hospital room was clean and bright, the nurses calm and efficient. Olivia tried to breathe through the pain, clutching the side of the bed as the contractions intensified. Hours passed in a blur of pressure and effort and sweat. Her doctor checked her progress, spoke gently, and eventually gave her the news she was too tired to celebrate. She was ready. The delivery was long. Her body screamed. Her heart pounded. Every fiber of her being was consumed by the primal, all-encompassing act of bringing life into the world. But when the first cry filled the room, followed by the second not long after, Olivia felt something shift deep inside her. It was as if her soul exhaled for the first time in years. The nurses placed both babies on her chest. Two perfect little girls, swaddled and squirming, their faces pink and scrunched, their fists clenched in protest at the brightness of the world. Olivia sobbed, overwhelmed. She looked from one to the other, not knowing how it was possible to feel so much love, so instantly and so deeply, that it nearly broke her apart. Later, after the babies had been cleaned and weighed and placed in the bassinets beside her, Olivia lay still in the hospital bed, exhausted and glowing with quiet awe. She had done it. Alone. Completely. Every step, every ache, every sleepless night had led to this moment. She had grown two human beings from a place that had once felt empty. And now, they were here. Real. Alive. She was a mother. A nurse gently knocked on the door before entering with a clipboard. "You have a visitor," she said softly. "A man. He says his name is Nicholas Rhodes." Olivia froze. Part of her wanted to say no. To send him away and guard the sacred space she had just created with her daughters. But part of her was curious. Hesitant. And very tired. She nodded. A few minutes later, Nicholas stepped into the room. He looked nothing like the man who had left her in silence 2 years ago. He looked raw. His eyes searched the room nervously before they landed on her. Then, slowly, they dropped to the two bassinets. He didn't speak at first. His breath caught. He stepped closer, cautiously, as if approaching something he didn't feel worthy of. Then, he looked at Olivia. "They're beautiful," he said, his voice thick. She didn't reply right away. Her eyes stayed on him, watching how his expression shifted between wonder and guilt, awe and confusion. He moved closer to the bassinets and leaned over gently, studying the girls like they were rare, delicate artifacts. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I've been thinking about what I would say if this moment came, and now I'm here and nothing feels like enough." Olivia watched him, still unsure of how to feel. But the girls stirred in their cribs, and something maternal took over. She reached for one, then the other, and held them close again. "They don't need words from you," she said quietly. "They need consistency. Presence. Patience." He nodded slowly. "I know. I can't ask for anything. I just want to try. Even if you don't forgive me. Even if they don't understand who I am for a long time. I want to earn a place in their lives." She studied his face, searching for cracks, for signs of his old self. But all she saw was someone trying not to fall apart. Finally, she motioned toward a chair. "Sit." But don't make promises you're not ready to keep. He sat, quietly, and for a long while, they said nothing more. They just sat in the stillness of that small hospital room, Olivia, holding the daughters she had once been told she could never have, and Nicholas, silently watching the life he had almost lost before it even began. The days that followed were unlike anything Olivia had ever experienced. Time moved differently in the hospital, slower, quieter, wrapped in the muffled hush of footsteps, the soft beeping of monitors, and the occasional distant cry of another newborn. Olivia spent most of her time skin to skin with her daughters, holding them in turns against her chest while the other slept in a bassinet beside the bed. Their names came to her gently, not through force or planning, but through instinct. She named the first baby Emma, the one who had cried first, louder and with more fight. The second, more peaceful and wide-eyed, became Claire. The nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting swaddles, offering advice that Olivia absorbed with quiet intensity. She was exhausted in a way she had never known, but also high on the kind of love that made every ache in her body feel worth it. Feeding was challenging. Changing them was overwhelming. Sleep was a myth. But through the fog of physical strain and emotional overload, Olivia felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Nicholas came back the next day, and the next. He didn't bring flowers or gifts. Instead, he brought questions. He wanted to learn how to hold them, how to bottle feed if needed, how to recognize different types of cries. He didn't try to impress or take over. He simply asked to be useful. Olivia allowed it, cautiously. She watched him closely, searching for signs of inconsistency, waiting for the moment he'd disappear again. But it didn't come. He sat with her during quiet feedings, helped burp the girls, and even took over swaddling when her arms grew too tired. It felt surreal, having him there, participating in the most intimate, vulnerable moments of her life after so much absence. But she couldn't deny what she saw in him now, something real and steady, even if it was still unproven. On the third day, while Emma slept in Nicholas's arms and Claire dozed on Olivia's chest, the room fell into a rare stillness. The sun poured through the window in soft afternoon gold, casting a warm glow across their tiny hospital world. Olivia looked at Nicholas, who was humming something under his breath, not even aware he was doing it. The sight brought a lump to her throat, not because it was perfect, but because it was unexpected. He looked so different from the man who had once chosen silence over support. There were lines under his eyes now, signs of sleeplessness and emotional reckoning. But there was also a softness in him that had never existed before. She wanted to ask what had changed, but part of her was afraid to hear the answer. Later, when the nurse came in and told her the paperwork was ready for discharge, Olivia felt a sudden panic. Going home meant returning to her space, her routine, but now with 2 infants and a man who, despite his recent actions, was still a stranger to this new version of her life. She didn't know how to make space for him without making space for pain. But she also didn't want to push away something that might finally be real. Back at her apartment, everything felt smaller. The nursery, once full of promise, now held the weight of reality. The cribs were ready. The clothes were folded. But the space was filled with uncertainty. Ava had stocked the fridge and left a note taped to the cabinet that simply read, "You've got this. Call me anytime." Olivia smiled faintly and placed it on the refrigerator door. The first night was hard. The babies cried at staggered intervals. Olivia's body ached from the delivery, and her mind buzzed with the constant alertness that only new mothers know. She tried not to resent Nicholas's presence as he took over changing diapers or rocking one of the girls, but it was hard not to remember how absent he'd been when she had needed him most. At around 3 in the morning, after both babies were finally asleep, Olivia sat on the edge of the couch, her head in her hands. She hadn't changed out of her hospital sweatpants, her hair was a tangled mess, and she could feel the tears rising again, not from sadness exactly, but from sheer exhaustion. Nicholas came into the room holding a glass of water and paused when he saw her. "You should sleep. I can stay with them for a bit," he offered. She shook her head. "I can't. I keep listening. Every breath, every sound. It's like my brain won't shut off." He sat down across from her. "You don't have to do this all alone anymore." She looked up at him then, tired but clear-eyed. "But I did. Every day for months. I faced everything on my own. I planned their futures without you. I grieved your absence before I ever saw their faces." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words without interruption. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "And I won't ask you to forget. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. Not again. I know I failed you. I know I failed them before I even met them. But I want to build something now, something steady. Even if it takes a lifetime to prove." Olivia studied his face. She didn't reply right away. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time, it was necessary. Finally, she stood up, walked to the nursery door, and looked back at him. "Then start by showing up tomorrow. And the day after that. And every day after that." He nodded. No grand declarations. No arguments. Just a quiet promise. She walked into the nursery, kissed both of her daughters, and sat beside them as they slept. She didn't know what the future would look like. But in that moment, with her girls safe and breathing beside her, and Nicholas outside the door, not as a memory, but as a presence, she felt something new. Not hope exactly. But the beginning of it. 3 months passed in a blur of midnight feedings, warm bottles, diaper changes, and lullabies hummed in darkened rooms. Olivia adjusted to motherhood in the most instinctual way, moment by moment, breath by breath, learning to read the subtle cries of Emma and Claire, to distinguish between a hunger whimper and an overtired fuss, to soothe them with a touch or the sound of her voice. Her body was still healing, her sleep still broken, but her heart had expanded beyond anything she thought possible. Love came easily, fiercely, and without condition. The fear remained, an ever-present hum in the background, but it no longer ruled her. Nicholas kept coming back. Not just for appearances, not just when it was convenient, but daily. He arrived early, sometimes with groceries or coffee, sometimes with nothing but tired eyes and a quiet determination to be useful. He took shifts at night when Olivia couldn't keep her eyes open. He learned how to fold impossibly tiny laundry, how to rock both babies at once, how to handle colic and clean spit up off his shirt without complaint. He didn't ask for praise. He didn't call himself a father. He simply showed up, day after day, and that, Olivia began to realize, was the only apology he could ever give that might mean anything. Still, forgiveness didn't come easily. Olivia had built walls around her heart that had saved her in the worst moments. Letting him back in, even in inches, felt dangerous. But as the weeks unfolded, she noticed the cracks forming in those walls, not because he was asking for entry, but because he wasn't. He never once tried to force his way back into her life. He focused on the girls. On being there. And slowly, she found herself waiting for the sound of his knock in the morning, missing his presence when a meeting ran long or he had to leave early. There were moments, fleeting at first, when she caught herself smiling at something he said. When she handed him one of the babies and their fingers brushed, and her heart didn't panic, it paused. One evening in late spring, Olivia found herself in the kitchen at dusk, bathed in soft golden light as she prepared bottles while the girls napped. The window was open, letting in the faint scent of blooming flowers and cut grass. Nicholas was in the living room, quietly assembling a new bouncer chair. She heard him humming again, some off-key melody he always seemed to fall into when focused, and a strange warmth bloomed in her chest. She turned to look at him, watching the way he gently tested the straps, adjusting them with care. He didn't notice her watching. He was completely absorbed in the task. Later that night, as the girls slept in their cribs and the apartment was wrapped in silence, Olivia poured 2 glasses of wine and handed him one without a word. They sat on the couch, close but not touching, both cradling their glasses in tired hands. She watched him for a while before finally breaking the quiet. "You're different," she said. "Not just how you act. Who you are." Nicholas looked at her, eyes steady. "I feel different. Being with them, with you, it's changed everything." "Why didn't you come back sooner?" she asked, not accusingly, but because she had carried that question like a stone in her chest. He looked down at his hands. "Because I was ashamed. I thought I didn't deserve to show up again. And I was afraid if I did, you wouldn't even open the door." She didn't respond right away. Her mind replayed those long months of silence, of doing it all alone, of wondering if she'd ever feel safe enough to trust someone again. And yet here he was, night after night, showing up in the quietest, most consistent way possible. "I didn't expect you to come back," she said. "And I didn't plan for you to stay. But you have." Nicholas set his glass down and shifted toward her. "I don't expect a second chance, Olivia. But I'd give anything to build something better than the first." Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't ready to say the words he might have wanted to hear. She wasn't ready to erase the past. But she was ready for something else. "Then stay," she said softly. "Not just for them. For real." A few weeks later, on the day the girls turned 4 months old, Olivia held a small gathering in the park. Just a few friends, a picnic blanket, sunlight and laughter and bubbles floating through the air. Claire slept in her arms while Emma tried to eat a blade of grass. Nicholas chased her gently, laughing as he scooped her up and spun her around in the air, both of them giggling with joy. For the first time, Olivia felt something inside her shift, not just relief or pride or gratitude, but something closer to peace. After everyone had left and the sun was beginning to set, Nicholas sat beside her on the picnic blanket, both girls sleeping soundly between them. He pulled something from his pocket. A small velvet box. Her heart skipped. "I know the timing's not traditional," he said. "And I know I have a lot more to prove. But I also know this is the clearest thing I've ever felt in my life. I love you. I love them. I want to spend the rest of my days making up for the ones I missed." He opened the box. A simple ring. Nothing extravagant. Just honest. "I'm not asking for a perfect future. Just the chance to build a real one. With you." Olivia looked at the ring, then at the man beside her, and finally down at her daughters, sleeping with their fists curled and mouths slightly open. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to protect herself from what she wanted. She took the box and whispered, "Then let's begin again." And in the soft glow of that golden evening, with the scent of wildflowers in the air and the sound of tiny breaths beside them, they did. The ending of this story is powerful not because it offers a perfect resolution, but because it honors the complexity of healing, love, and second chances. Olivia's journey is not one of waiting to be saved, it's a story of rebuilding from the ground up, of transforming heartbreak into strength and silence into purpose. She becomes a mother not by luck, but through courage, and she lets love back in only when it's earned. What makes this conclusion resonate deeply is that Nicholas doesn't sweep in as a savior, he returns changed, humbled, and ready to prove himself not with grand gestures, but with presence and patience. Their reunion isn't built on forgetting the past, but on growing beyond it. The proposal, quiet and unpolished, mirrors their new reality, not perfect, but honest. Not fairy tale, but real. It's a rare kind of love story, one where the happy ending doesn't erase the pain but makes it meaningful. The girls, born from a miracle Olivia was told she'd never have, are a living symbol that life can still bloom in the spaces where everything once felt lost. This ending doesn't promise a flawless future. But it promises something more important, a future built with truth, forgiveness, and the kind of love that chooses to stay.